the market literally went off a cliff. That was Black Friday, the first time back in 87, I think September, if I recall. And the real estate industry just went into the tank. And for people complaining about today's business, I'm sorry, you didn't live in the 80s and the 90s. It was way worse. I mean, way worse.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Multifamily Hangout. I'm Adrian Danila, your host. I want to welcome you to the 26th episode of the show. I want to start by thanking our sponsors from Kairos and GPS Roof Leak Repair for making this broadcast possible. With this being said, I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Chris Moreno. Take it away, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. And really excited to have our guest here today. Thanks, everyone, for being in the audience. We're going to have some great questions, I'm sure asked. We're going to go deep on some story share here. But our guest began his real estate career over 30 years ago up in Washington, D.C. He has extensive experience, having worked in Boston and several markets across many diverse asset classes of multifamily, from C-class to value add to A-class high-rise, focusing a lot on operational strategies, revenue milestones, and extensive experience. So, and worked at organizations from Bonaventure to Avenue 5, Kettler, Federal Capital Partners, Equity Residential. So the list goes on and on. Received his MBA from the University of Michigan. So I want to hear a little bit maybe about sports. We're going to dive into some fun stuff. So thanks, without further ado, Dave Ohlrich. Really want to appreciate you coming on board today. Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I definitely was humored by the U of Michigan conversation that came up a little bit on online there. So thanks for throwing that in the background. That sort of prompted that.
Of course. Yeah. And so first off, would love to hear how you fell into real estate, how you got into it, and maybe a little bit about the evolution of your career.
Sure. It's funny. I was just having this conversation with somebody yesterday, and how the number of people we talk to in this business who tell us that they fell into it, right? That they were looking for a job in the summer and they took a job as a leasing agent. The next thing you know, they're a VP of operations somewhere, or whatever the case may be. There's an awful lot of people with those stories. And I think realistically that is the case on the management side more often than not. There's a lot of folks that got into the business, not probably really knowing what they were getting into, but loved the sales aspect of it, loved the people involvement aspect, and stuck with it. My story is a little different from that perspective. Gosh, all the way back to high school, I was really intrigued by architecture, development. I had some friends today even that are involved in construction and development, different aspects of the business. And I took a drafting class in high school and did some crazy little drawings for our community pool, trying to tell them how they should rebuild their clubhouse and all kinds of things like that. And when it came time to go to college, I was pretty good at math and science, and people said, go, I got into engineering school, and they said, go to engineering school. You'll always have a job. You'll always make money. And I was like, okay, that sounds reasonable to me. And so I launched myself off to engineering school at the University of Michigan and got about a year and a half into it and took a gut class in the art school. This is a story I've told many folks before. I was walking through the art school and I'm looking around. I'm like, all these people look really, really happy. And they look like they're really enjoying what they're doing. And here I am in engineering school. And most people in engineering school are not running around talking about how happy they are when they're doing problem sets at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, or running up to the lab on a Saturday to check on the status of what's going on. And I thought, I was really interested in architecture. Let's go back to that. I applied and I was able to do a double degree, architecture and basically a civil engineering aspect as well. So I came away with 2 degrees, launched myself into real estate that way. So long story short, I wanted to get into real estate. I wanted to get into that business at the time. I probably just didn't know what I was going to do then, but that's where it would start.
I want to ask you, what is this passion for architecture coming from for you?
I don't know. The short answer is I don't know if I can. I don't know if I have a great answer. I laugh because I think honestly, I use this on my application for architecture, and I've said it a couple of times in different places that I credit my career in real estate from watching the Brady Bunch and looking at Mike Brady as an architect. And for those of you who are my age or older, even the courtship of Eddie's father, who was also an architect on TV. And I always thought that was a cool job. I think that's what, you see these guys going out to building sites and, looking at their plans and drawing, and it seemed like it was great. I do have, though, beyond just that kind of the humorous aspect of it, I do enjoy the built environment. I've always had interest in historic renovation. How many people do you know that will tell you that they would probably for fun pick up a copy of the Journal of Light Construction and read through the different pieces of it? I mean, I like that. I mean, I will look at those things and say, what's going on? And, how are people doing things? How are they building things? What's the craft look like? Go to this old house, same kind of thing, right? I like that aspect of it and always enjoyed it.
So I'm curious, I love the built world too. And I think a lot about, like you talked about architecture and, as you pick up your guide, you think about history, right? And especially with your knowledge of Boston and seeing all these different markets.
Very much.
How important is that history to you? How do you think about like that, involving that in your career? Like, do you like the new modern looks, or are you a big, fanatic for incorporating that history and keeping history?
It's a great question, and one that I kind of asked myself a little bit too. I do have probably a default for very traditional real estate, and I love the architecture in Boston. I love the architecture in Philly. Some of the older stuff in DC that you can look at, the more classic. It harkens back to Greek and Roman architecture from that perspective. But I really enjoy the older stuff. But at the same time, I have a real soft spot for like mid-century modern and that kind of thing. But, you get into Bauhaus and things like that, form over function or function of whatever you want to call it. Some of this stuff is a little, when they refer to concrete construction as brutalist, it's pretty brutal in my opinion. I don't love it. Glass and concrete and stone and, brick in the right ways. I mean, I like the space layout in more modern construction, but I do have a soft spot for traditional colonial. That's I grew up in DC, so you get that.
So Dave, I want to go back to your journey. We left that you undergraduate with degrees in engineering and architecture. So walk us through your journey after that, after the graduation.
I left thinking I was going to do construction management. I initially thought I was going to do architecture, truthfully. And then I had two experiences. One, I did an internship with some folks that I knew in the business. I saw people that had gone to graduate school to get architecture degrees at well-regarded institutions that were doing the same thing that I was doing as an intern. And I thought to myself, do I really want to go push myself that direction if I'm going to be doing the same thing, drawing reflective ceiling plans at a drafting table when I'm, 30 years old. And the other aspect of it that really threw me a little bit was the way the compensation approach works for architects. And most architects just don't make a lot of money. It's a tough business. And I would say that when you look at it from that perspective, I kind of looked at it and said, I'm not sure this is really the direction I want to go. I'm also not the most creative guy in the room. I mean, I love architecture, but I looked at people like Philip Johnson and I.M. Pei and those kind of folks, and I was like, I'm not there. I mean, that's not my skill. So the short answer is I decided to go into construction management. I did it in DC. I worked for a group in DC, came out in 87. And for those of you who have 30 years experience like me, 87 was a really bad time. The market literally went off a cliff. That was Black Friday, the first time back in 87, I think September, if I recall. And the real estate industry just went into the tank. And for people complaining about today's business, I'm sorry, you didn't live in the 80s and the 90s. It was way worse. I mean, way worse. I mean, it gives me some perspective, which is helpful. But I worked there for 4 years, was sitting at a table with some developers at a morning construction meeting where I was non-participating because I was the interior design guy. Thought I want to do what they're doing. In order to do that, I needed to go back and get an MBA. So I went back to Michigan, got my MBA, left Ann Arbor after 2 years there, again, 2 more years, and went to Boston. We went to work for Kenneth Leventhal. And for those of you who have been around for a while, Kenneth Leventhal was the boutique real estate consulting and accounting firm at the time. People thought I was nuts for taking a job in real estate because of how bad the market was. But again, I wanted to do it. And I did. Learned some really cool stuff, met some really cool people, a handful of them that I still talk to today. But they basically worked themselves out of business, going through what the right term is. It's the end of the RTC, DIC thing, where we were basically securitizing loans and selling them off. And all the institutions bought these loans. And so real estate became a more institutional platform at that point, really, because before that, it was a lot of big private entities. And so walking into that world then, I was there. I would have probably stayed and worked for Ernst & Young, but we had our first child in Boston. My wife decided, and I agreed, that we needed to come back to DC, where we were both from. Led me back to NHP. Here, I walked into an interview, again, serendipity, I guess, to a degree, walked into an interview at NHP. The head of asset management said, hey, somebody just quit. Do you want a job? And I was like, sure. So getting to your original point of how did you find your way into multifamily real estate, that was my fall into it. I walked into an asset management job not knowing what I was getting into. But it was a great group. NHP at the time was the largest multifamily company in the country. Was there for 2 years, did a lot of financial work, loan workouts, bond refundings, bankruptcy protection for deals that were being bought in the loan resales, that sort of thing. And then they were acquired by Aimco. And Aimco offered me an opportunity to go to Denver. And I said, no, I don't really want to go to Denver. We just moved back to DC. And at the same time, again, another door opened. Equity Residential decided they were looking for an asset manager on the ground in DC. So I found my way into that job. And that was really my first big launch into multifamily, because that was true top-notch business, major growth. We were doing all kinds of fun stuff, buying property left and right. So I was there for 8 years, running basically asset management in the East Northeast. Again, great group of people. The people that I work for, I can't thank enough. They taught me a lot about this business that I still think about today. Things that led me in the directions that I went. Continuing the path, Adrian, since we've been going down this one for a while, and it is a 30-year path, so it's a bit long, ended up about 8 years into that. I looked around and I was like, I feel like I know more people in New York and Boston than I know in DC, and I live in DC, and I was traveling a lot. And at that point, I had 3 young kids. So I took an opportunity through a friend of mine who I'd met at NHP to go work as a land acquisition manager for NVR, single family homes, in the DC area. Seemed like a great opportunity. For those of you who have read or seen The Big Short, it really wasn't a good opportunity. Unfortunately, 9 months into that, I was kind of looking around going, this isn't going to last, because we couldn't sell anything and we couldn't buy anything. And sure enough, a couple months later, we were all, not all of us, but a number of us were heading out the door. But again, serendipity, doors open and close. I found my way to Federal Capital Partners, and Federal Capital Partners was basically a young company at that point, local operating partner for Angelo Gordon out of New York, and doing a lot of value add stuff in the DC market and general surrounds. Really fun place, good group, small, looking for somebody to help develop an asset management function. And so that's what I ended up doing for the next 10 years. And it was great because we launched a fund about 1.5 years later and really moved into a different level of operation. And again, I couldn't thank those folks enough. It was a great place. Still talk to a lot of those folks today as well. But after 10 years of that, I took an opportunity to go work for Cindy Clare. And this is where the path probably diverges from the norm, in the sense that I went from asset management to property management, which is sort of the opposite direction a lot of folks do. But I felt like I knew property management from an asset management side of the table. And I felt like, generally speaking, there was a lot of opportunity within the property management world to do things. I want to say this with the right thought in mind, because it's not a negative thought. It's really, I wanted to take property management to a higher level. I wanted to try, at least, to try and do things a little bit more professionally and with the mind of an owner instead of the mind of a manager, because they are two different things. Cindy and I talked about it. Cindy agreed that was something that she wanted to do with Kettler. There's, I won't go through the full detail of Kettler timeframe, but there's a nice little foreshadowing that occurs there that leads to something that I can't really talk about yet officially today. But we lost a large client right in the door who took their management in-house. And shortly thereafter, and unrelated, but shortly thereafter, Cindy left to go run Bell Partners. After about 1 year of that, Bob Kettler decided to downsize operations there. I found my way over to Avenue 5. Now I'm a pure third-party property manager. Very, very different from what I was doing before, and very different from what I was raised from. Great opportunity, again, great group of people. I mean, I've been really lucky because almost every place I've been, the people have been spectacular. Love the people at Avenue 5. Learned a whole different side of the business that I needed to learn, frankly. I woke up late in my game there. I was 3 years into that. I kind of woke up and I was like, all I'm doing is selling property management services. And that's just not what I set out to do. I was okay at it. I'm not going to tell anybody I was a rock star salesperson, because I'm not. I think it was a good experience, a good opportunity to meet some new people, see how that side of the business works. And 2 years into that, or 3 years into that, Bonaventure came calling and said they wanted somebody to run all of their operations, property management and asset management. And I took the bait. Unfortunately, finishing that chapter out, Bonaventure then decided to merge their property management about 3 months ago with a group called FCA out of Charlotte. So I have been looking for a new position. Now, I will tell you that I have found a new position. I'm just not in a position to share the name just yet. I will be moving on to run a larger property management operation again, self-managed this time, which is what I enjoy. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I've met some great people. I've done some very different things. I've been able to cover most aspects of management. I mean, I think within that, I mean, when you get into the details of what I actually engaged in, I mean, we did development, we did renovations, we did stabilized assets, we did suburban, we did urban, we did high rise, we did mid rise, we did garden style. I've done, single family, BTR. I've done multiple aspects of that because we've done the sort of what we would refer to as horizontal apartments, which, really are sort of an amenitized smaller community with direct entry apartments versus not truly scattered site. I haven't done that aspect of it, but communities where it's rented without an office and that sort of thing. So lots of different things. And again, tons of fun. I've been able to run construction management at a couple different places too, which I really enjoy. And that's really helped me understand the maintenance aspect of the business. So lots of good stuff.
As you mentioned, you've been in the industry for a number of years, and there's people who kind of stick at one company. There's people who have a storied path at multiple companies. And I always thought, for me, I was like, I was at one company for a very long time, but I actually find, and I want to learn from you and hear your thoughts, about being able to learn from these different organizations and these different people. Like you mentioned, Cindy Clare. Cindy Clare was the first person to pull chairs up for me at NEA probably about 10 years ago.
There you go.
Then I remember, Dave, when I met you, when Cindy moved on and you were president at Kepler in Washington, D.C. And so really like these people who make an impact. And I would love to hear from you kind of your thoughts on leadership and how these different people, and do you think it's more the people, or do you think it's the culture that of each of these organizations from the leadership that has shaped your leadership? And is that something, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that idea of creating leadership and culture at these organizations.
We have another hour and a half. I mean, I think it's a great question, and it's something I think about a lot. Culture, in my opinion, comes from the approach of leadership. It can be one person, it can be it can be the leadership team, I think, that push the culture. Culture is a critical thing, because if you enjoy the company and you enjoy the people and you enjoy the mission and you're all on the same page, I mean, you're going to succeed. I can't promise that, of course, but I mean, I think the reality of it is that if you've got a good mission and you've got a good group, you're going to do some good things. I've always told people, and I obviously have been going through this process of looking for employment for a bit here, and at this point in your life, to your point of having been through a lot of different places, you sit back and you reflect. What have I learned? What have I done? What do I bring to the table? There's a couple things I look at. I've always been of the approach that you find good people and you bring them onto your team and you let them excel. You give them some guardrails and some guidance, but I'm not hiring people to tell them how to do their job. I'm hiring people because I think they can do the job, and I want to give them the ability to do the job within the guidelines of what we're trying to accomplish as a company. And assuming we're all seeing the same thing, then I think that works well. I'm not a micromanager, because I don't believe micromanagers do a great job either, because I think that can work at certain levels and in certain areas. But as a leader, micromanaging is tough. You struggle with, sort of how you're letting people do their job. Let's put it that way. I mean, I just don't want to tell people exactly. I want to give them guidance, and probably I default at times to telling them a little too much. Realistically, I want to give people the area to prove themselves and go from there. And I think that leads to a good culture at the end of the day, because I think people feel that they are participating in the success. They feel like their method is adding to what the outcomes are and not necessarily just doing what somebody else tells them to do. I'm not big about taking credit for what happens either. That's not really my job. I mean, again, I feel like if I get people going the right direction, that's what matters. Credit is for everybody. We all win or we all lose. I mean, I'll take responsibility for the loss, but at the end of the day, if we're winning, we're all winning because we're doing it together. So that's a little bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but that's my view.
Before going to my next question, I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today. So, Dave, you mentioned that you said you don't want to be a micromanager. I want to ask you, can a leader be a micromanager? Is micromanaging coming from an area of insecurity? And then can a very insecure person be a good leader or a leader, period?
I mean, flippantly, short answer, I think yes, micromanagers are somewhat insecure. And I think if you're coming from that area, it's going to be difficult to lead. I think people that are micromanagers may have a little bit of a control issue, which leads to the insecurity issue, which again, you can do that in a small organization, right? I mean, if it's a small place and you're going to very heavily focus on it, you can probably get away with it. And you might even be able to get away with it and not come across poorly poorly because of it. But in a large organization, you can't do that. I'm not an expert in marketing. I got to hire somebody who's good at marketing and let them tell me what makes sense to do. And I can help give them guidance and I can help tell them how much money I have to spend, but I can't tell them how to do it. I probably default more on the construction management side of doing things like that because I've done it before. But again, I'm looking for somebody that can run a project and get it done. If I'm looking at maintenance, I want people who understand how that works. I'll help give them some guidance. If it's accounting, God knows I'm not an accountant. Again, I need somebody to give me what's important and help me with that. So if I tried to micromanage those things, I'd collapse. I would fail miserably. There's no way I could do it.
I'm kind of wanted to also get your thoughts around, obviously, prop tech. There's things that are ready, and then there's things that are in the future. And there's trends and there's fads. I want to get your thoughts. Obviously, we're seeing major issues in the insurance market, issues in the fraud market. What are you seeing out there? Feel free to name some examples of maybe something you saw that was a fad and maybe something that you really think is a trend we need to focus on.
Insurance is a tough one in and of itself because I don't know that there's an off-the-top answer to how to deal with that. I will give you a little bit of and I think the people that work for this group will probably say it's a bit of a plug for them. But when I was at FCP, we were going the standard approach of hiring a broker, and it was a great group of people. They enjoyed working with them. We kind of outgrew the ability of the broker to manage what our business was becoming, and we tried to decide: should we bring somebody in-house to run risk for us, or should we hire a firm to manage our risk for us? And we went through a pretty long process of review and then ultimately chose to hire a group called RM Curry out of Boston to be our risk management consultant. And when we did that, the reduction in our expenses for insurance was about 50% year one. And we improved our coverages. I mean, look, this goes right back to the don't micromanage issue or don't try to run it yourself. I had no idea. I still don't know how to run insurance. That's a whole other language. I mean, it's Byzantine. I don't understand it. But at the end of the day, I know the value of it and I know what you need to get from it. We were able to find a solution that for us in that case made a significant improvement in our product, also reduced our expenses. I don't know that you could do that today because I think the markets are simply different than they were at that point. This is 15 years ago. But those guys were great. I mean, we had a great relationship with them. They solved some amazing problems for us, saved us a load of money. I mean, at the end of the day, that's huge benefit. We brought them to Kettler, actually went to Kettler and brought them on board there too. So insurance, different animal. Again, that's probably another hour and a half conversation on its own with somebody who understands the business. But you're saying, Chris, prop tech from that perspective, areas in prop tech then?
And now a word from Dean Fungawing, founder and CEO, Kairos.
There's so many maintenance issues that can be solved with simple data that tells you, hey, this is not working right. Go take care of it.
Dean, amazing conversations, very educational content.
Our core technology, it started with leak detection, right? And again, knowing about the issue sooner rather than later, right? And the difference between our sensor and most sensors that you can find on Amazon or anywhere else is those are consumer grade sensors. And when you're dealing with multifamily buildings, you're dealing with commercial buildings, you're dealing with an environment that's a little bit more intensive than a home. 250 homes in a community as opposed to one home. You've got a lot more redundancy of risk. And so this technology notifies you in any place that you need to know that there's water. The moment that there's water in that area, anywhere behind the dishwasher, in the front of the dishwasher, the water heater pan, the HVAC closet, the washing machine, laundry room applications, hydronic pumps. We've seen all kinds of areas, PTAC units in places like New York. We created a specialized sensor just for PTAC units because, again, we print this material, this conductive material, and that conductive material is attached to this little module, and that module sends out a signal. It's operating on a 10-year battery. It has the ability to transmit a signal through 5 to 10 floors of concrete in a commercial building. That means that you have to have 35 times fewer base stations to collect all that data. You've got this broad covers. Now you've got visibility across your site of the real-time risk. And coming very soon is severity context so that your maintenance guys aren't seeing a bunch of signal noise and they're ignoring things, right? Those are newer sensors that we're coming up with. And really what we've seen from customers is that they're avoiding insurance claims.
I mean, obviously that's great. Like obviously finding partners, whether it's prop tech, and we talk about the built world,
right?
Whether it's fraud, you talked about insurance, even hardware. Are there any kind of things in hardware or in the building efficiency, things that relate to customers and or operations that you found are really important right now, or things that you've seen that are big trends?
Again, one of the things I've been able to benefit from for a long time is being on the multifamily advisory board for TransUnion. I know there are multiple solutions out there for these things and many that work. I was able to utilize them in a situation when we were at Avenue 5, getting TransUnion on board for the resident ID product, because we were having, I'm trying to think if it was right around the end of COVID, or I can't remember time now. COVID screws up everybody's times, as we know, but we were having a lot of problems with a couple properties where people were coming in and renting, effectively sublet renting, or they were coming in and saying they wanted to rent on the spot, and we were giving them the apartment before we'd actually run their credit. So we had to make some changes in there, but we ended up using TransUnion's credit, a resident ID product, and it stopped fraud in its tracks. I mean, it was at the time, I can't speak to it today, but this is probably 3-4 years ago. We rolled it out at Bonaventure as well, and it did seem to help a lot at Bonaventure. So there are certain products like that I think that focus heavily on fraud. It wasn't expensive, which is also helpful. Those things were critical. If you focus on it the right way, you can find solutions to it. Hardware, that's a whole nother game, right? Because then you're starting to get into, IoT stuff at that point. We're talking about thermostats and leak detectors and lights and locks and access control. And that's an area that has been jumping for a while. I have talked to a bunch of people. The benefit I had in having several months to sort of look around in the market was I had the opportunity to speak with a number of people who are playing in that space. And there are some folks doing some interesting things with the access control model. Everybody loves Butterfly MX. It's a great product. It's relatively expensive, but it's a great product. But what else can we do around that? People were doing Wi-Fi enabled approaches to multiple buildings where you could connect via Wi-Fi that way. And because nobody uses a phone anymore, they're all using their internet or their cell phone. How do you connect that way? One of the things that we ran into, we started this conversation primarily I've had the conversation for a while, really started it primarily at Bonaventure, but was using Quex product, which we had been involved with. And the reason I bring that up is because we wanted to try and do smart locks, but we also wanted to have control of thermostats. And the thing that we kept running into, and I think some of this is changing now, but we kept running into Wi-Fi was typically enabling the thermostat control via a resident's account and not via a site-wide Wi-Fi system. And when the resident moved out, we lost access to the thermostat. So the key time from my perspective that I control that thermostat is when the resident moves out to move in, because that's when my vacant electric costs are there. Painter goes in and jacks up the thermostat or jacks it down because they're trying to keep the paint cool or the room warm or whatever it may be. And if I don't control that, then I'm losing money, and I'm not sending anybody out there just to check every thermostat every day. I could, but I don't. Quext has a program that runs off of LoRaWAN, and I don't want to even try and describe the technology, but effectively it's a low frequency wide area network, I think, something to that effect. But it allows you to connect those thermostats all the time to the office. So the manager can sit there and put set points in for vacant units and that sort of thing, and I can control that cost then. So there were things like that we've looked at. Those are all, realistically, they're cool things. They're all nibbling around the edges of the business. They're not moving the needle at a great speed, but they are doing some cool things. They also control leak detectors. They were looking at water usage, which I think is an area which I'd love to see really grow, because right now I think the business doesn't do a great job of tracking water loss. There's a couple interesting products that do it, but trying to find ways to see where I'm losing water is important. And if I can find a cheap way to do that, it's really cool. And right now I haven't seen a really cheap way to do it. I've seen some cool products, but not super cheap. So trying to find that spot. Gosh, there's so many other things. I saw a really cool product at NMHC last year that I was thinking to myself, man, I was a pool manager, a lifeguard, coach, all that stuff as a kid. And I used to do all that stupid pool testing where you go out there and you pick up the chemicals and you drop water into a little thing and it turns pink and you go, yeah, I got enough chlorine in the water. Great. Here's the color, match it to the chart and tell me what it is, right? And these guys have a product that basically measures the chemical makeup of the water and reports on it, constantly. I'm looking at that going, there's a lot of pools in the South where you don't have to have a lifeguard. But I hire somebody to do that, or I have my maintenance guys go do that, and they never get it done right. Not because they're doing it wrong, but because they don't have time. They don't get there. I have to be there every hour. Oh, I missed it this time because I got a call for a toilet overflowing or something. So this is a really cool product, and I think it's something that could make a difference in the market and it's not super expensive. It could really help not having to hire people to do it. So those kind of things, really neat. I like those.
You answered it awesomely. That's exactly what I was looking for. It's broad enough to where you're thinking about certain types of products, you're thinking about these issues. You've got 50 things on your list at any given time, right? And sometimes the 50th thing never makes it above 20 because other things keep coming up and up the list. So that was really, really helpful and insightful. And, you talked about NMHC, NAA. Are you planning to be at NAA and NMHC, and what other events do you think about going to see supplier partners out there?
It's a mixed bag. I'll be at NAA, definitely be at NAA this year. I tend to participate in the executive forum with that group. The show is impossible to get through. I mean, the first time I ever went to NAA, and this is probably 13, 14, 15 years ago, I walked on the floor and I was like, I'm going to get to like 4 things I really should have planned ahead to figure out what it was I wanted to see. Because just walking around and looking at stuff, you'll never win. So what I have done from that perspective in the past is trying to engage my management or asset management teams and say, look, here are the 5 needs that we have on our list. I want each one of you guys to pick like 5 vendors and go meet them and find out what they've got on the table and find out what their product looks like and what stage it's in. NAA is a little different because I think it's so expensive to be a part of that show that you tend to look at more mature product in that space. The one thing I've always enjoyed is OpTech when they do sort of the speed dating, if you will, of new products that are out there. And I've seen some really cool stuff there, some which has launched and some which hasn't. The online demo days thing, I met the guy that I've been doing some work with on the AI front over the last couple of months. I met via demo days, and it's a really cool product there too. And I think it sort of tells you where the business is going to go when you start thinking about that. So, I will probably go to OpTech. Again, OpTech's going to be here. If I recall correctly, it's going to be in DC this year. So that's a little too easy for me to go. So if I don't go, it's a little bit of a slack thing for me, but I like to go. NMHC, the actual annual conference, mixed bag for me because I'm not an acquisitions guy, and I'm not doing third-party management. I think third-party managers do well there. I think that, if you're acquisitions or brokers, it's a good thing for you there. But the NMHC conference itself, for me, probably a little less valuable. I'll go if I'm meeting investors, but not necessarily from an operational perspective.
Dave, I want to go back to you overseeing very large portfolios of properties. You work for very large companies, very well known and respected names in the industry. What are some lessons that you would like to share with us from a scaling perspective? Because obviously it's one thing to oversee 10,000 apartment homes versus 100,000 apartment homes. It's such a big difference. It's kind of like night and day. So what are some great lessons that you've learned along the way, being an integral part of a business scaling up and going fast?
I mean, I don't think it's interesting, Adrian. I don't know that there's necessarily a secret sauce to that. I think you've got to be thoughtful. So think about when I was at FCP, one of the things that we said at FCP when we first started growing was we didn't want to go anywhere that we couldn't get to in a car in a day and back. So that sort of kept it, because then we could control it. We could see it. We knew it. We focused on what we knew. And I think that was important. And even when we grew, there was a heavy focus on knowing the market before we bought. So when we would go into a market, like when we went into the Carolinas or we went into Atlanta, or I know after I left, going into the Southwest, a lot of time spent in those markets, learning who are the players, where are the where are the submarkets and neighborhood, what's good about the economy, what are the risky areas, going into Nashville, some of that same kind of thing. So we were really focused on trying to understand from an investment perspective, the markets before we got into them. And I think it made a very big difference in our success. Even going back to equity, it was the same thing. Now, granted, at equity, I think we would have bought anything we could get because at the time, the market was just so good that we were achieving our pro formas in the closing period. The markets were that good. So I think it was really hard to do a bad deal. But even then, I remember spending a bunch of time with Alec Brackenridge, who was the acquisition guy at the time in the Northeast. We were all over New England, looking at deals, doing due diligence, looking at different products. And I know he spent, 10 times the time I did, meeting brokers, meeting owners, touring properties, touring neighborhoods to try and figure them out before you really dive. So knowing what you're getting into is critical. From a management perspective, I might be a little blasphemous when I say things like this, but I don't think you jump into a market to expand your management capacity if you don't have effectively some kind of critical mass in that market. Cindy and I have talked about the fact that when Kettler first went into the Carolinas, it was a struggle for Kettler because I think they picked up 1 or 2 properties for us when I was at FCP. And it was hard for them because they didn't really know the markets. They didn't know the nuances of hiring down there. They didn't know necessarily as well what the licensing requirements were. They learned it, and they learned it in conjunction with us. But in retrospect, it might have been better for us to get 2 or 3 assets on the table, maybe get a fourth and then bring them into the market where they could put a regional on the ground and learn the market. And if I did it, I'd say at Bonaventure, when I took over management there, one of our regionals was looking at a property in Charleston, South Carolina, and his nearest base from there was Virginia Beach. It's a 6-hour drive or something to that effect. It's a hard way to manage one asset in another city that you don't have anything else in. So ultimately I said to the team, I said, I think let's pull this one back. Let's give it to a third-party manager and let them run it. And when we get more property in Charleston, we'll take it back. Doesn't matter to me. I mean, we own it. We can do what we want to do. And I think that's a fair approach to things, to say, get somebody who's good at the local market. Look, at the end of the day, I'm making 3% or whatever it is on the deal from a management perspective. I'm making a lot more than that on the ownership side of the table. So am I going to risk my ownership returns because I want 3% in management fees? No, never. It doesn't make any sense. Adrian, I don't know if that really answers that. I think that the other piece of that about scale, I think, is just there has to be a willingness on the part of the whole team to spend some money ahead of the game. The last thing you should do is say, I'm going to short straw this thing all the way out, and I'm going to try and expand from 20 to 30 or 40,000 units, and I'm not going to spend the money on the support structure behind it, because you will fail. You will not get you won't have what you need to get that done. You're better scaling ahead of time. Look at the startup companies that are out there. I mean, they burn money to set up their operation before they make money. And I think there's a lesson in that. It's hard for real estate people to understand that, but that's really where the success comes from. If you want to be good at what you do, you've got to set up your structure and build into it, in my opinion. If I say I'm going to go to Chicago and I'm going to start working and building and managing in Chicago, I need to probably put a regional on the ground in Chicago before I even have any property there, because I need that person to know who the people are in the market. I need them to know what's going on. If we're going to go there, you got to commit to it. So that would be my take on it.
I think what you were just sharing, and something I took away, was like, how do you focus your time? How do you focus your attention? I think the nuggets you just dropped about ownership versus management and how people think about that. We're seeing some mergers, very timely. Another hot topic around data in multifamily management and ownership. Data, AI. How are you thinking about leveraging decision-making? How are you thinking about it, obviously, with the data around revenue management discussion?
Man, I mean, data is such a big topic, kind of near and dear to my heart right now because of the conversations I've been having with the AI folks. When I say AI, I mean, AI has been one of those terms that's been tossed around for a couple of years here, like it's the gold standard, and it's not AI. There's some components of it that are slightly AI, but I mean, just because you have a bot answering questions on your lead platform doesn't necessarily make it AI. I go back to another book that you could look back to at Moneyball and another movie. I think this business needs to focus on, and the folks that I've talked about AI and about business intelligence platforms, that's where we need to go. There's so many things out there. Where do we market? That's a start. Like, where am I spending my marketing dollars? Where are those people coming from? Are they coming in? Are they renting an apartment? Do they then renew that apartment? Do they pay the increase? Do they go delinquent, or do they not go delinquent? How do we connect all that data so that I know that I'm properly spending my marketing dollars, or that I'm properly spending my legal dollars collecting on somebody, or whatever it may be? Or even from a maintenance perspective, how do I focus on that? I mean, centralization is a hot topic. I think that AI probably coalesces with that in a lot of ways around the leasing process. How do we track leads, and how do we track the leads to actual leases, the pieces of that puzzle that go together? So the thing that I find interesting right now is, I'll step back a little bit. When I was at FCP, one of the things that we recognized fairly early on in our process when we launched our funds was that we were spending a lot of time with our analysts parsing data and creating reports for our funds. We were doing quarterly reports. You look at these quarterly reporting data, and you get that data after 3 months of the year. And it comes out, 15 to 30 days post that quarter. And then you're spending another week or two trying to pull that information together and understand all the pieces of it that make sense. And you're reporting then, 30 to 45 days after the quarter on what happened. This is stuff that's now 4 months old. I mean, what is the point of that, right? Inching your way to the solution issue here. But we looked around and said, can we use a business intelligence tool for this? Because at FCP, we had, I think at that point, 15 different managers or something, and everybody's using a different version of RealPage or Yardi or Entrata or GenArc or whoever they were using at that point. We had to pull that information together by hand and sanitize that information. And we can only do it at a high level. So we looked around, spent some time talking to different groups out there and came across Domo, who now is doing business intelligence for Entrada, interestingly enough. And Domo was a great BI platform. They had really very easy to use, not super cheap, but good for a smaller investment shop. And we were able to basically create, with their help, a data lake that then pulled that information out, where we were able to sanitize all the information coming in. So we could say a lead on this platform equals a lead on this platform equals a lead on this platform, or occupancy here equals occupancy there. So we knew that data was the same. And that side point, that's a critical component of AI going forward. If that data is not consistent from platform to platform and understanding and definition of that data is in wrong, none of this makes any sense. It doesn't provide any value for anybody. So critical component. The data has to be consistent and correct. So we created this data lake and then put Domo on top of it. And we were able to cut our reporting way back and we had real-time reporting on most of the portfolio after that because we were pulling data on a daily and in some cases hourly basis. We could pull reports anytime we wanted, and our quarterly reports were really easy. And they were also very visually appealing because it's a good product from that perspective. Now, AI, I think, is actually a step above that. It's basically requiring the same base. It still requires that data lake, so to speak. But I can now start to parse that data around and say, what does this piece of data do? How does it relate to that piece of data? And I think at the end of the day, that if you really combine that AI approach with a really solid business intelligence base, it's pretty cool. I mean, it really provides some ability to look at data in ways that I don't think anybody really is right now. And people should be, because there's some cool opportunities to do that. It really helps in decision making. It can get as simple as doing weekly reporting for people. I mean, can you pull out the information and identify the metrics you want and basically tag against those metrics and trends that are occurring because of them, and get ahead of my struggling properties and my watch list reports and all those things that go with it. So it's pretty cool. I can geek out on that a little bit. I enjoy it. It's kind of fun.
I love that too. I'm a huge geek for this stuff. Adrian and I love going deep on it. So always happy to jam on it when you see stuff at an NAA or an MHC. We're always happy to go down that rabbit.
Good stuff.
Dave, we have a question from the audience, from Jason Biskov. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, your last name, Jason. You have been successfully moved between quite a few companies throughout your career. What information did you use to decide on your next move?
Who was willing to take my call? I know. I mean, it's a funny thing because not every one of those moves was by choice. I've been laid off a couple of times. So you look at those situations, and depending on how that works, what your timing is on that, it gives you the ability. I would say process is always a little bit difficult because, again, you have to do some navel gazing and figure out what's going on and why did this happen and where are you going from here. But it also gives you an opportunity to really network hard. The fun I've had this time, and frankly, it happened before I went to FCP. When I left NVR, it was the same thing. I spent a lot of time talking to people, and most of the conversations weren't about, do you have a job for me? Most of the conversations were like, what are you doing? And what's interesting? And what do I like? And who do you know? And who should I be talking to? And it leads to a whole bunch of different stuff that you get engaged with during that process. And it helps you learn what is important to you. If I were a younger person, I might make a different decision than I am at this point in my career, than, based on what opportunities are out there and what the market looks like. So what do you need? What do you want? And what are other people doing? I mean, I've always said, when you're looking for a job, it's dating. And it's what you're doing. You have to be in a room where at the end of the day, you want that date to lead to a marriage, right? You want to be on the same team. You want to be thinking the same way. You want everybody to agree. And you're not going to agree all the time, but I mean, you want to be on the same page about your approach to things. That's what the process is all about, trying to find the right group to be with on that.
I think that was great. I'm curious to get your thoughts too, as you're thinking about these influences on your life. We want to give you a chance to shout out some names and call out some people, but the importance of having a mentor and having people who've been there for you in your career. Are there some people you'd like to call out and thank, some stories?
It's interesting. I mean, I already mentioned Cindy. I talk to Cindy all the time today. When I found out that I was going to have this new role, I will say Cindy played a role in my getting that role because of that. So without question, I would shout out Cindy Clare. But you go back over time, I can go back to, NHP. I mean, there was a guy named Tom Alm. I've lost touch with Tom, but Tom was a great guy. Really, he was the first one to really take me through reviewing financial statements. He had a portfolio of 400 properties, you know, as an asset manager that were all affordable properties, and they were all over the country. And the man traveled 6 out of every 8 weeks or you know, whatever it was. He was always on the road. And he would take me to the local ones because I was pretty young at that point, and let me sit in the room. And then he would ask me afterwards, you know, what did you take away from that? Who you think the strongest regional was and why? What did they do? And it was great because we were all doing paper reviews back then. There was not online. It was all paper. And when a regional walked into the room and their stack of financials was dog-eared and highlighted and yellow stickied, you knew they knew their stuff. And when they would come in and ask you questions instead of being asked, and the minute, you know, if they sat down and they had a clean deck and didn't say anything, you were like, they don't know what they're doing, because they haven't looked at their financials, and can't even answer the questions. So Tom taught me a lot about financial review back then. He was the first one to actually introduce me to revenue management, and this is in 1993. So he was introducing it to me from hotel and airline usage back then. You know, when I look at FCP, my time there, I mean, the biggest takeaway probably from there, Lacey Rice. Lacey's one of the founding partners there. He really, he gave me some insights to the business that I thought were really good. The way he approached it was really good. He had a very intense and yet kind of laid back at the same time approach to how he managed stuff, which was not the opinion I was given of how he would be when I first went there. I was told that he was pretty tough to work for. And I mean, frankly, I enjoyed working for Lacey, and I still talk to Lacey today. Gosh, I mean, Equity Residential, there were so many people there. I mean, it's hard to really pin anyone down, and there was some change. But I mean, I worked initially for Matt Wakenight. I don't even know if Matt's still there, to be honest with you. Matt was great. He worked with me closely. I already mentioned Alec Brackenridge, who I believe is their chief investment officer these days. Alec was a great guy to work with on acquisitions. So good fun there. I had a construction management guy named Kevin Gogolab, who's up in New York, and he was great too. So good people there. You know, it's been good. I mean, where do you go? I mean, go Kettler. We talked about Cindy. When I go to Avenue 5, I'd say Steve Davis and Mary Susan Waynick really learned, you know, interesting. Mary Susan and I worked together at NHP, which I didn't realize until I interviewed with them. And it was like, oh, I knew you. I knew of you. I didn't know you back then, but Mary Susan was great. Steve was great. Good people in these operations. So it's been fun. I mean, you take away a little bit from everybody. That's the benefit. It goes back to the other question that Jason made. I think you take a little bit from the people you meet. You use those things as you go into new situations, and hopefully it's the good things and not the bad things. So,
Dave, we have another great question from the audience. This one comes from Connor Boucher. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You guys are challenging me today with hard to pronounce for me last names, but excellent question. Curious to hear if Dave thinks the domestic migration trends in US will continue in coming years and the effect it has on multifamily housing. Will Florida and Texas stay hot? No pun intended.
They will be hot. Yeah, it's a good question. There was just a thing that Jay Liebig posted on LinkedIn, and Jay and I go back to Equity Day, so I track what he's saying, where migration had really pushed into a lot of the Sun Belt because domestic migration had pushed into the Sun Belt because of COVID trends, and that had pulled back. I mean, short answer is I think that there will continue to be some level of migration into those markets because they are generally less expensive. They are generally pretty good about opportunities for jobs, cost of living. I mean, all that's, I mean, it sort of benefits from that perspective. The weather's generally nicer if you're not in Florida or Texas. So I think that probably continues to a degree. I mean, there has been interesting impacts, and I'm not going to go political, but there's been some interesting impacts I've read about lately in Florida, probably to some degree Texas too, because of the political environment and who goes where. But I don't think it stops people from going to those places. I mean, there's something to be said for sitting on the beach in Sarasota instead of, sitting in Minnesota, just honestly.
I completely agree. Grown to love the East Coast as I moved over from California. How do you think about legacy, and how do you think about how you want to be remembered with others? Like, how do you walk away? What advice do you have for those on building legacy?
I think there's two things I would say. I hope I've given people an interest in the business that they may not have had before. I continue to be pretty fascinated by this business as much as I said I was going to be involved in development or something when I first got started. I think operational real estate is fascinating. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I hope I've created that interest in other people that I may have, had, and hopefully I've shown that excitement enough to create that interest in it. The other thing is I hope there are some people that are successful because of their involvement with you. I hope I've been able to not just to create that interest, but to actually sort of work with people and give them the opportunity to be better at what they do. I mean, I know there's a couple people out there that I definitely have pushed to try and do different things or to be better at what they do. But I mean, I hope that opportunity exists, because it's really, at the end of the day, making people excited about what they do and providing them the opportunity to grow are the two things that really matter, in my opinion.
Dave, I want to thank you. It's been amazing having you here today. Great interaction with our audience, great conversation. Any final thoughts for us and for the audience?
I don't know that there's anything I could say that's groundbreaking or earth-shattering or anything like that. I mean, the business is going through an interesting time. The one thing that I would tell people, again, this is what comes from being in this business for 30 odd years or whatever it is, that things are bad and things are good, and it always changes. And generally speaking, it will, if you think it's bad right now, it'll probably get better. Keep toeing the line, doing your job, doing it well, looking for the opportunities, and things will turn out. Like I said before, things are tough right now, but they've been a lot tougher before. So just kind of get through it, and we'll get to the next phase, and it'll be a lot of fun the whole way through. So that's the way I would look at it.
Thanks again for being with us today, Dave. I want to thank our sponsors, Kairos and GPS Roof Leak Repair, for making this broadcast possible. I want to thank all of you that join us in audience live and ask questions today. We hope to get you back here. We have a special coming up on June 25th. It's going to be a huge personality in real estate of New York, Bob Knuckle, and nationwide, right? He sold over $22 billion worth of real estate. So it's going to be a conversation worth watching. I promise you that. We're ready for it. Chris and I are looking forward to it. Thanks again to all of you for watching us today, and we'll see you on the 25th. Have a great afternoon.